Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Henri Lamothe, and it's great pleasure that I introduce to you someone who I've become acquainted with for multiple months now, Mr. Deron Cloud.
Hello, sir. How are you
Deron,
doing? Good to see you, my friend.
good to see you as well. Thank you for being here. I think it's important to bring Deron on board because he is really no different from millions of you. And what I mean by that is that he, at one point in time, came head to head with a medical crisis. The unpredictable crises. You can't tell when it's going to happen. Some are accidental, some are inevitable. But sooner or later, you come face to face with dealing with a personal issue, a health issue that is potentially life-threatening. And then you get thrown into this maze of a healthcare delivery system that is extremely complex. That's why Deron is here today, because I'd like to hear your side of the story. I'd like to hear about your medical crisis.
And I'm glad that you're asking that, and I'll just start here. I learned that everyone, as healthy as you are, one day you have that crisis. If it's not for you personally, it's for someone in your family. And for me, my crisis came when I could not get off of the floor. I had a very bad headache. And every time I took a pain pill or anything, it wouldn't go away. I slept in my basement for 6.5 to 7 months because the only place I felt comfortable was close to the floor. And after going through several doctors trying to figure out what was going on, I was told to go to the emergency room. And when I went to the emergency room, they said, what we're going to do is a spinal tap. And when they took me to the emergency room, first I called several women because I said, all I know is pregnant people getting spinal taps. I went in, and I asked them, and they said, hey, I've done it. And when they did the spinal taps, they found cancer in my what is my spinal fluid, and they found this cancer cells. I had already had a challenge with lung cancer 2012. I beat that battle, and when I say I beat that battle, I went under the cyber knife because I did not want to do radiation and all those because I was at least knowledgeable about that. And then when I got there and they told me it metastasized to my brain, this is when I was in the hospital and made some decisions to say, all right, I have to fight for my life. I used to say I came into the hospital with a life and left without one. But now what happened with me is that my crisis, once they tell me I had it in my brain, and then I started suffering from the side effects I'm sure we'll talk about, I made a decision that I have to tell my story. Earth, Wind, and Fire, from morning to glory. And I'm not talking daytime in the morning. I'm talking about morning to glory because I am back. But the crisis brought me to where I'm at, and that's what I've experienced.
Was your journey challenging earlier on? I hear you use the word metastasis, new lingo, a lot of different languages the physicians use in order to tell you what's going on. Sometimes it's foreign to you. Right. As an emergency room physician, I've found at times that I try to explain what's going on with the patient's condition, and regardless of the fact that they have 3 or 4 well-educated family members around them, they all look at each other at times and says, what did he say? So the first is to overcome the language of the business, the language of the medical jargon that is sometimes complicated, not deliberately, but complicated enough that you're left in a phase of confusion.
You're in when you have a crisis, we just automatically believe we're going into the doctor or the healthcare system or the emergency room, whatever, or we go in and they're going to take care of you. But I found out sitting in that room is a no man's land because no one tells you anything. You don't get to find out, and you just have to follow. They come in and they look at a screen and they tell you what the problem is. You ask a couple of questions, they make sure you got somebody there with you so that you won't break down, and then you get the information, but then you walk away, but you have no control over what's happening. And so when you go back and you get in the car and you're going home, you've received all this information. but you don't know what the heck to do with it. And so for me, it was a no man's land because I didn't know what was going on. And I don't care how many family members you have. If everybody's speculating, you don't have the right information. So that was my response into this crisis. And life is normal. And then all of a sudden, you have a moment. And when you have that moment, I call it the grind to wellness. You have a moment, and it's a call to understand you now have to overcome something. And what was normal has now become abnormal, and you've got to overcome it. And that's when I had to make a decision that I was going to have to conquer the fear of uncertainty, because I needed to have my information, and I was finding out I didn't have information.
You were fearful, confused.
Oh, I was terrified.
Yes. How did you transition from that?
I had to go into meditation. I had to find out what was real. I had to learn how to give meaning. One of my favorite authors is Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And he says you have the right, he did logotherapy, and he says you have the right to give meaning to your suffering. And I had to make a decision. Either I was going to give fear to my suffering, and that was the meaning, or I was going to give it that I am being led into another portal or a new level of thought to think in a new way. But I realized all my life I thought I had overcome fear. But it's not until you had this crisis that you're sitting with somebody like yourself. And unfortunately, I won't say unfortunately, and this is what I like about you, and I told you this even before we even started talking, you've got a compassion for the patient. And had I had someone who had the compassion that you have for the patient, my crisis, I would have been able to answer the call much faster. And my call became, tell the world.
I see. Now, this unfortunately led to not just affect you, your family members were affected. The support system was there, not there. How did they handle your condition, and as you were dealing with it personally, as they handled you, you were their caretaker?
If you're the point person and you're used to being the one that's giving everybody all the wisdom, all the knowledge, and then something happens, and where you were first among equals in the room, all of a sudden you cannot produce what you used to produce.
Yeah.
Your friends don't know how to respond to you because they're taken aback. They go through a traumatic experience. I didn't even realize my daughter, she would talk to me while I was in the hospital, but I found out later she was losing it at the hospital, and they were having to help her because everybody gets traumatized. The person, if you're married or if you have a significant other, they get traumatized. And so now they're trying to be with you, but at the same time, they're trying to handle their own emotions because they're expecting some type of loss or something to happen.
You can imagine that for the hundreds of thousands of individuals who go through the healthcare system, to walk away with that sense of confusion, as it negatively affects you personally and negatively affects your family members, it's traumatic for a tremendous number of individuals, not just the patient,
right,
but everyone surrounding them.
Right. Go ahead.
Was there information that, as you dug into your own medical records or your own interaction with your physicians, did you finally see the light that gave you the opportunity to become more involved in your care?
Once I realized that I was now on NIH site, looking at all the different diagnoses, all the different studies. So I had to work on trying to pull myself out of this dark space that I was in. And I began to understand, I need to understand this medical terminology. And I had to make a decision, they call it bone up. I had to really learn, what am I experiencing? And then try to interpret the doctor's reports, because I did get to look at some of my medical records, but at the same time, but nobody explained anything to me.
I see. So what was generally lacking? I imagine that this is an area where the support system wasn't there, the information, you had to live, it was you who took the initiative went onto the websites and took a look at your conditions and tried to understand what was going on with you.
What was lacking? I needed someone to explain to me what I was going through. No one told me you're going in to get in a spinal tap. This is what's going to happen. No one told me you don't want to take this medication and that. Had I had my medical records, every time I went into that office was another SAT score for me, exam, where they're asking me information to remember the milligrams, to remember how many you're taking, to take this, to do that. And I didn't have information. So when I was terrified, because they says information is power. Well, if you have information on your records, you have control. Well, I was out of control. And it was daunting every time I left the office, because I now have to search my mind, my soul, and everything to figure out what's the right answer and what am I supposed to do. That was my experience.
Did you find the system somewhat confusing as to how you maneuver from one specialist to the other in order to deal with the pattern of therapies that they were instituting and how one affected the other?
I realized that the physicians had meetings. They explained to me that all the people in oncology, because that's where I was, they have a meeting every week and they discuss each patient's case. So I got to see that I was feeling like that was being taken care of in that way. But because there was just no explanation as to what you're going to experience. And so it's just an uncertain journey. There's no expectation of what's going to happen. And so that's why the fear and everything once again came in.
After overcoming the fear, did you have any inkling as to how you were going to maneuver the next time this came around? Do you have any solutions that you at least thought about?
I was going to have to become consistent. My health was going to have to be priority. I had already changed my diet on a lot of different ways and done all these things. And so they would say to me when I come into, you don't normally have the typical health of an African American man. You definitely, now I do have hereditary high blood pressure and that kind of stuff. But and what was the question? I want to get back to it. What did you say again?
Were there any solutions that you came up with and how to maneuver
I
through
came to the
process?
conclusion that I was going to have to come up with a battery of thoughts that I was going to have to meditate on. I was going to have to take acupuncture. I was going to have to visit other herbs. I was going to have to use medical food products. I was going to have to use things other than just synthetic. I would have to, and I believe that you do need synthetics as well at times, but I was going to have to take my control, my health in my control, and study what have people done. Because Dr. Henri, I didn't have help. And so I remember one time, and I love doctors, but it was as if one doctor, I actually said, "Are you in a hurry? Because I can barely walk into this place." And she wanted to let me know I was 4 minutes late. And I didn't understand that until I got really studied the system. She only had 7 minutes to talk to me. And so she had to keep going. And the solution I had to be, those who become an advocate for themselves, those who say, I refuse to do this until you explain to me what is going on, and I'm just not going to go. We may seem like difficult patients, but we are also the people who are informed. And so my solution was to advocate for myself and to say, listen, sir, why are you giving me this test? What does this test have to do with my case? Well, I said, no, please tell me, because each time I had to talk to another set of doctors, I got stressed all over again. And the last thing you want to do if you're fighting with cancer is be filled with stress in the place you're supposed to be getting healing. And so I had to say, listen, do me a favor. I'm only going to talk to the doctors who are working on my case. I'm not talking to attendants. I'm not talking to anybody. Now, that may seem crazy, but when you're fighting for your life, You need the right people to talk to you. And I don't need to be scared to death because I am now training all these other student doctors. So they asking me the same question because everybody walked in with a white coat. Everybody who walked in with a white coat was asking me the same questions, but I didn't understand this was their job to do that. And my wife had to say, listen, miss, please don't share anything else until we talk about what he's gone through, because I don't, as the care and the gatekeeper, she had to say, you all are upsetting him every time you walk in here and say the same thing, and he has to tell the whole story. So my solution was to overcome fear, change my thought process, give meaning to my suffering, and decide I'm going to let it be a portal to being able to fight for life. And I call it surthrival. Surthrival is this. When they say super, surthrival means to thrive and live beyond where you are. Thrive means that you don't dive, but you go up. And so I was going to surthrive. I was not going to survive or exist, but I was going to thrive at the new normal. That was my solution.
What a great solution. Did you find the characters of the doctors friendly, accommodating, or were they stuck in their own whirlwind of time warp and time constraint? Because part of the complexity of the system, unfortunately, is that there are 24 hours in a day. Mm-hmm. And as difficult as it is to get to subspecialty care to take care of your medical problems, the interaction between yourself and a doctor becomes paramount in you understanding where they're coming from so that they understand where you're coming from.
Right.
So that communication then becomes a non-factor.
Right.
Did you find them to be friendly, cooperative, or how did, in general, in your experience?
It was varied. I'm glad you asked that. I found doctors who were compassionate. Then I found people who was just checking off forms and just checking off things, but they weren't connecting with me. And then I found doctors, while I was talking, who would put their hand on my leg and say, it's going to be all right. You're going to go through this, 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 and this. And then I found some doctors, literally, one doctor told me, I said, sir, if I try natural food products, if I do this oil, if I do this hemp, if I do anything to help me, he says, if you want to die, then go ahead. This was my oncologist. This was the head of the oncology department. And I looked at him and said, are you really saying this to me? And I said, well, is it because my hair is all over my head? I said, because I didn't comb my hair before I got here. Forgive me. I didn't plan to come to the emergency room and have to get a spinal tap. But now you're telling me that I'm going to, if you don't do what we're saying, you're going to die. That's why I got another opinion. And once I got the other opinion, I said, what is happening? And what I found out, there was one doctor. I bet you he's a lot like you. He couldn't say, he wasn't going to betray his profession. But at the same time, he said to me, you have to be consistent and faithful with the instructions that I'm giving you. And he shared me a story about his own wife's situation. And he said that she was diagnosed with a certain form of cancer. And they told her she wasn't going to live but so long. And she said, he said, we watched all our children graduate. We watched them graduate from high school, from college, and all these different things. And that's when I understand. If you have somebody who has compassion, that are not just speaking negativity, but speaking solution, be it homeopathic or allopathic, and they agree. I had one doctor who did a residency in California. So in her doing her residency in California, she literally told me, when I was taking my hemp oil, whatever you're doing, don't stop it. And because she understood what our systems were made of. So the answer to your question, it varied. It went from here to here. And because my daughter is a pediatrician, I understood the pressure that doctors have, because I don't know if you have to do it, but they got to go home. Well, you tell me, do you have to go home every day and write notes out for the day that you experienced?
Well, you try to get that done before you leave.
Y'all got a serious job.
Absolutely. But nevertheless, the system is fairly complex. We've come to understand, even as physicians, there is some built-in complexity to the system where there are so many processes involved. Now, I'm not making any excuses for the problem, but I think you cleverly found somewhat of a solution that made sense to you.
Right.
The fact that you're able to find someone that allow you to investigate the possibilities of homeopathic medical therapies that have been around, that was very powerful.
Right.
Because we don't have the answers for everything.
Right.
Not everybody who walks into the emergency room walks out smiling and 100% happy with
Right.
100% rosy diagnosis and prognosis.
Right.
That doesn't happen.
Right.
The idea that you need to be somewhat out of the box thinker.
Right.
You need to be very innovative. You
Right.
took control in a lot of ways of your own condition, and I applaud you for that.
Right.
Because within the
Thank you.
system of the the healthcare delivery system, it can definitely lead for individuals like yourself to be lost in the system,
Right.
uninformed in the system.
Right.
And also, we have to face the fact that as much as there's a magnifying glass over what every physician does, there's not enough emphasis and not enough response for us to realize, hey, how are my patients doing today?
Explain that to me. What do you mean?
How are the 20,000 patients I've seen in the last 5 years doing today?
You don't have that kind of time.
Exactly. So time becomes important. But we have to recognize also that everyone can find their niche and find their niche if they're empowered to find
Right.
their niche. And that's what you did.
Right.
You were investigative, you were clever in searching out for your own diagnosis, but more importantly, you've developed relationships and was aware of where you hit your head against the wall, and you need to back up and try again another way.
If I was going to thrive, I was going to have to write a diary for my health. And everything I went through, from every medication, how I felt, what was going through, because I got to the point when I go to the doctor and they begin to ask me these questions, I'm going to have the answer, because it's a test every time you go. And the good thing, even if you're going through a cloudy space, if you are prepared, and I tell this to, I don't know what camera is, but if you're prepared, if you are literally prepared to go to the doctor and with all your notes and decide it's more important that I get solutions and responses than it is that I just go in and just be a sheeple. I have to be a part of this process. And what you showed me, what I've learned through knowing you and the compassion you have, there is one doctor, like I told you, 2 other doctors who gave me hope. They gave me hope because they would say, I know I'm supposed to be finished. They would sit down and talk with me another 7 minutes. And guess what? I got to cry and feel what I had to feel, and I felt the compassion for them. And so that was my solution. And this is why I'm so happy about Secure My Medical Records. Secure My Medical Records, because had I had that, it would have been phenomenal.
We can speak about the value of Secure My Medical Records. Tell me about what it has done for you.
All right. It has done. One day, after reading and understanding it, I became a patient of Secure My Medical Records even before it became the complete reality. And what Secure My Medical Records did was it reduced my anxiety. It reduced my anxiety because now I had information. And because I had 3 or 4 doctors that were now accountable to the doctors who were saying that what I was going through was psychosomatic. And looking at my wife saying, I think what he's going through is in his head. Has he been up under stress because I'm a pastor and all these kind of things? Secure My Medical Records brought clarity to me. Secure My Medical Records saw that when they prescribed one medication to me, but then they prescribed another one that was counterproductive, I was able to find that out. And then I was able to do it in real time, as opposed to waiting 2 weeks, 7 days to find copies of something. I was able to go through it and have a clarity. That's what Secure My Medical Records did. And I felt alive again.
So what you mean by that, but you had access to and you were able to gather all of your records. It's like creating what I call a medical footprint.
There you go. That's it. That's
It
the
is a
best word.
footprint of who you are medically through time.
Right.
It's parallels what you are economically through time with a credit score.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in your medical world, through that complexity, you found that you were less confused, more on top of your situation, because by assimilating your entire medical footprint, you're able to feel that at least you're able to converse with the physicians and find things that helped you in a short run and a long run.
Secure My Medical Records made me answer the question, how often do you leave the doctor and forget to have asked these questions? How often have you left your doctor's appointment and said, man, I wish I had gone. I should have did this. But by this time, you're already at the light in the parking lot of the facility. And so you say, okay, I'll do it when I come back. And so Secure My Medical Records keeps your notes of everything that you need. And then it holds the doctors accountable. They can't just say anything if people like you are on a medical concierge and you're telling me, listen, man, this is a freaking game changer. Do you hear me? This is a game changer for the healthcare system. And this is why I've dedicated my life, because there needs to be a patient advocacy group for us.
I totally agree.